Hey everyone, John here, and today I just want to sing the praises of one of my favorite Nintendo Switch games, because I feel that it's done dirty quite a lot in its reception. It's often put in the same group as the lesser first-party Switch games, but in my opinion, it's one of the most replayable, has some of the most layers, and it's just pure fun. I don't know why I'm skirting around with the game, you clicked on the video. It's Mario Tennis Aces, and watch this a second. We're going to boot the game up. Just keep looking. It's done! That's all it takes! Compared to other Switch games, this game boots incredibly fast. I don't know why I'm starting with load time as the selling point of the game. But it does load very quickly, which is very cool. And that is actually kind of important, because a lot of Switch games like Smash Brothers and even Mario Kart take a while to get into the gameplay. So if you just want to play just one game before bed, or you're in a hurry to go out, you just want to sneak one little game in, it's actually incredibly quick to do so, and that may be part of the reason why I've played this so much, because it's just so easy to access at all times. But that's of course not the reason, and you may be thinking, alright John, is this really one of your favourite Switch games? Is it just because it loads fast? And no, and you might also be thinking, but I've heard this era of Nintendo has some of the worst sports games, and correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't tennis a sport? And I've enjoyed some of the sports games of this generation, but in my opinion, Aces is the standout. It stands much higher than Golf Super Rush and Nintendo Switch Sports and Mario Strikers. And I think the reason for that is they've taken a formula that has worked for many years. So the core of the game, if you strip away all the mechanics and gimmicks, what you're left with is just raw Mario Tennis. In fact, what you're really left with is Ultra Smash, which is not a big selling point, but the underlying base is definitely Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, and it's incredible that they managed to salvage one of the best games in the franchise out of one of the most basic games in the franchise. And it really all comes back to that gauge in the corner of the screen. So, tennis is already a sport of mind games. It's always about where are they going to hit next. You might be on the right side of the court and you expect them to hit left, but they may try and mess with you and hit right instead. It's all about, like, will they lob, will they do a drop shot? There's so many layers to tennis as it is. But that gauge in the corner basically turns it into a fighting game. Because it's not just about returning the ball now, it's about managing that gauge. If your opponent has just a little bit of left, like if they're in the red part of the gauge, you might want to be a bit more risky with them, try and just catch them off guard. But if they've got a lot of gauge, what you're going to want to do is make them waste it. You're going to want to make them slow down time and utilize it a bit more. And that is always the thing, no matter where the ball goes, you're pretty much always able to get it as long as you have some gauge in there. And you can get more gauge by returning shots, or predicting where they're going to hit it and doing a little trick shot before they even whack the ball. You get a bit of gauge doing that. But there's just so many possibilities. Not a single round of Tennis Aces plays out the same, and that's because of this zone meter. Will you do a zone shot where you can freely decide exactly where it goes and have the possibility of damaging their racket if they can't quite return it perfectly? Will you do a special shot using the entirety of your gauge to do one big attack, and if they can't land it perfectly, they break their racket entirely? And that's another part of the depth. It's not just about winning the game, not just about getting the most points. If you can destroy both of their rackets, and they have 2 of them per game, then they're out. So do you want to be offensive? Do you want to be like really aggressive with your play? Or do you want to be a bit more safe and just go for points? That is what it's all about. They could be completely just dominating you in terms of points, but you can get them out quite easily if you're just trying to chip away at their racket. And there's more layers there too, because if they only have one bit of health left on their racket, they may decide that zone shots and specials aren't worth trying to return, and they'll just let them pass, because if they try and get them and fail, they're out. So all of a sudden, you're getting points. The gameplay of Tennis Aces is just so versatile. This series has never had this much gameplay depth. Before now, it was just kind of a fun arcade tennis game, and that was great. We've had great games in this franchise, like Power Tennis that come out of there, and the first one in 64. But this is something different. It's not just a sports game. I really do think it's a lot more like a fighting game, where it is about dealing damage, and the form of what damage means can be up for interpretation depending on the scene. But that is the pure essence of Tennis Aces. It is fighting game tennis, and that is something I didn't know I wanted. And I'm still coming back to play it over and over again. How long's it been now? Almost 6 years on. To be honest, if a multiplayer game is fun, there isn't really a whole lot more that matters. There are people who just play Smash Brothers on Final Destination and Battlefield, There are people like me who just play Among Us on the first default stage because that's the one I know and that I'm comfortable with. And with Tennis Aces, I think it definitely is lacking in variety. That is definitely a very valid complaint. I pretty much only play online tournaments. I don't really touch any other modes, especially outside of just playing the single player for the first time. And with online tournaments, like, yes, you have different stages you're playing on, but they're all pretty much the same. If you were to play friendlies, then yes, these courts do have their differences, like different bounce speeds depending on the terrain, and also there's stuff like piranha plants in the middle, or a pole, or bob-ombs you can launch at each other, so it definitely has that Mario flair. But all these years on, people generally aren't playing friendlies, and the only sort of mode you'll find players in is an online tournament. That's where everyone has just sort of migrated to. And most of this time with the game, I have never struggled to find anyone, and that is still mostly true. It depends on exactly what time you're playing. I found that a lot more European players seem to be drawn to this game. So if you're playing in more European-friendly hours, you generally won't struggle to find people. It definitely has waned a bit as the game has gone on. It is 6 years old now, which is pretty far along considering how many other Switch games there are to play. But the active community is still there, and I love how great the roster is too. There are many Mario games on the Switch now, but I don't think a single one of them, in fact just counting the entirety of Mario, I don't think a single one of them rivals what Tennis Aces has in terms of its roster. You've got so many cool characters, and there's very little filler either. Like, there's no baby characters, there's no Koopalings, you've just kind of got the core Mario crew, including some characters that we see less of, like Pauline. Then you've got a bunch of enemies like Chain Chomp and Spike, and Koopa, and Blooper, and so many more. And the end roster has ended up being something that's really quite impressive. Like, this is quite a lot better than what Mario Kart 8 has, it's a lot better than Strikers, it's a lot better than Golf. I'd say it's even better than Sluggers on the GameCube, which had a very good roster too, and the Wii game, which we never got here in Europe. And also what's cool is this is one of the first games in this new era of Mario that really allowed him to experiment a bit more. Because up until now, every Mario Tennis game just had him playing in his overalls. It was always just Mario is Mario. Sometimes he can roll his sleeves up, like in the GameCube era, but otherwise he's just that man in overalls. But with like Odyssey allowing him to wear more outfits, and now we've got like the Return to Mario RPG and Thousand Year Door coming. But this game allowed Mario to actually wear sports gear, and that's something he's done again with Golf and the newer Strikers. And granted, Mario Strikers on the GameCube and Wii did that too, but no other game did. So it's just cool that this was kind of the return to Mario having kind of a character again, and it felt good with that. I will say, one of the biggest shortcomings is the audio design. I think visually it's very nice, in fact. The models look great, the arenas all look great, but they have a weird habit of reusing character voices that are decades old, and sometimes even using different voice actors. Like, Bowser here just switches on the fly between what voice actor they're using. And in the opening, like, do you think this fits the tone?
Luigi!
And I think the footsteps may be from Mario 64. They definitely sound very Mario 64-y. But when it comes to the pure gameplay, there is nothing like Tennis Aces. There is no other sports game that plays like this one. And I just love taking risks in this game. Like, sometimes I'll have no gauge at all. But because I've played for quite a long time, I've kind of got a feel for the timings of attacks. And I sometimes can just return zone shots and special shots without slowing down time. And it feels so good when you do that. Because not only have you managed to somehow catch them off guard and they probably won't return the shot because they're not ready for it, but you also get a big part of gauge rewarded for that. So you get an upper hand while they've just lost a bunch of their gauge. There are so many mind games you can play. And it is just exhilarating to master Tennis Aces. Now, I will say the online community now is filled with players like that. It's filled with players who have mastered the game already. So if you're trying to enter it now, you may struggle a bit. And for that, I guess the single player kind of works as a tutorial. I think many people were expecting a return to the Game Boy Advance and Game Boy era of Mario RPG sports. And in terms of that, it is a letdown. What I think this really is it's just an elaborate tutorial mode, really. There's some cool boss battles in there. In fact, there's some really cool boss battles. You've got the usual Nintendo floating hand boss. You've got stuff like a puzzle boss in this sort of mirror ghost mansion area. You've got some really cool bosses that make different contextual uses of your abilities. Like the trick shot usually is for jumping towards the ball that's too far away from you. But in the blooper boss battle, you can use the trick shot as a platforming mechanic to jump over his tentacles. And I love when it's recontextualized like that. But for the most part, I guess what's in the single player is what you'd expect as side modes for most Mario Tennis games. So things like trying to hit targets or keep a rally going, or just these very specific objective-based things. Tennis Aces doesn't really have this as just like a side menu. It's all just kind of packed into the single player. And it definitely does lack that presence. But to be honest, in most Mario sports games, I will play that stuff for a little bit. It does leave a lasting impression to play the sort of Mario-themed minigames, but it's not stuff you put much time into. And while I would have liked to see it, in the grand scheme of things, it's like 2 hours out of 150-hour run, and I don't know how valuable that is in the long run. I do hope the next game has that stuff, just to appease people who want it, but for me, the core gameplay is carrying it so far. And yes, I think the next game can do better than Aces. I think you can get better audio design. I think you can get better side modes. I think you can just be a bit more exciting with the Mario flair. Of course I do. But I don't think I necessarily like Tennis Aces because it's a Mario game. I like it just because it's a crazy, weird, genre-defining tennis game that I've never seen anything like before. And that's probably the reason I'm still playing it all these years later, because there's just nothing else filling that void. And if Mario Tennis is to revert back to just pure tennis gameplay with the next game, I may still be playing Aces. If they don't iterate upon these zone mechanics, which I hope they do. I don't want these to disappear, they're so good. I think this is just going to go down. I'm not even using hyperbole here. I think this will go down as like a lost Nintendo Switch classic. It's definitely a huge hidden gem. I know it's sold a couple of million, but in terms of its appreciation, I think there's so little else like this, and there's so little else that's as fun as Tennis Aces. So I'm going to quit this ramble now. I know I'm not going to convince people who've already made up their mind that they don't like the game. That's fine. I just want to talk about why I love it so much. And I think it all just comes down to its mechanics. There are definitely points of criticism, which I will not overlook. I think they're definitely in there. But when it all comes around to it, Mario Tennis Aces is just a hell of a lot of fun. And I can't put it down all this time later. Thank you for watching, everyone, and I hope you have a great 2024. If you're watching this in 2024, how's it going? Let me know. Is life okay? I'll read your comment. If you just need to vent, that's fine. Doesn't have to be about Mario Tennis. I'll read your comment. I'm not your therapist, but I can listen. All right, I'm here. Okay. Bye.